As an artist, I think it's so important to highlight the trust and comfortability that a client feels when they work with us and how open discussions can really deepen the experience of getting tattooed. In this series, I explore and engage in honest and open conversations with my special guests through the therapeutic process of tattooing. Tattoos are more than just an art, it's a connection. Welcome to Tattoos and Tribulations. Hey guys, and welcome to Tattoos and Tribulations. Today I'm joined by my friend Amiel. He is an illustrator that went to college with me, and we reconnected a couple years later after graduation. And today we're going to be talking about gender identity. And speaking on that note, I just want to congratulate Amiel for being on 9 weeks on testosterone. Woo! Today he will be getting a 3-headed flail. If you've been to medieval times, you know exactly what these look like. With regards to the conversation of gender identity, Amiel and I will be talking about where we're at in different stages in our lives, figuring out what the best options are for us. Would you like to tell a little bit about yourself, Amiel?
I'm a trans man. I use he, him pronouns. I think when we first met, I was identifying as non-binary. It solidified over time into, I guess I'm just a dude. I've identified more with masculinity versus femininity my whole life. If you consider yourself part of the community, then you are. It's very self-informed. Mm-hmm. No one can look at you and be like, you were born a girl. You are who you say you are. Growing up very stereotypically like a tomboy, so I didn't like wearing dresses, I didn't like pink and all that sort of stuff.
Gender norms really are bullshit. Hopefully through this conversation you guys will understand what we mean by that, because you can have very general interests and still be a cisgendered person, but certain things are just looked upon as if they are more feminine or more masculine. Those ideologies just come from a heteronormative world.
Even things as simple as a wife going to work and like a father staying home cooking, that to some people is very shocking, fitting outside of the gender norms while, you know, these people are still cis.
In my example, I like to do my eyebrows and I like to keep my hair long, but I identify as non-binary with they, them pronouns, and the instant assumption is that I am a female, or that I am feminine, or that I'm she, her.
In regards to gender norms, like, yeah, never assuming based on what somebody looks like or how they do something. Yeah. You should ask them, you should have a conversation with them, find out more about them as a person.
People really focus the conversation on your genitals, like specifically, and that is just, on so many levels, wrong. That should not be the first question that you ask us. Our assigned gender at birth, what we're carrying in our pants. If that is your main concern, you should probably be in jail. Asking someone what their dead name is. I understand people's arguments of biology and whatever the case may be, but we really want to reframe the conversation to focus on gender identity and gender expression being one thing and biology in another sense. A lot of these conversations that are had between these communities, they don't understand these are questions that are wrong.
Think about why the information that you're asking from this person matters to you. If you know them as a different name, then use the name that they gave you. It's that simple.
It's rooted in common courtesy and respect.
Yes.
Right? Give us the respect to be able to have these conversations with you, and give us the respect that you're willing to learn and willing to understand.
It's not going to affect you. It's the respect that you have for the other person that is important.
We understand that these are very difficult conversations to have with your family, to have with your community and your friends, but the people who will support you will try their best and they will learn. Yes, people do take their time to learn, but there has to be a certain point where you set a boundary and you say, okay, like I've given you a lot of time, other people have caught on and you haven't, can we discuss that? All right, you ready for it?
Yep. Pathetic shit.
Oh, great.
I hope.
So coming to terms with your own identity, do you want to go a little bit into that?
The first year of college, so I think that was like 2014, I was very like, no, I'm definitely a cis straight girl. And I had long hair. I think I had the longest hair I've ever had in my life. Trying to be comfortable with this. At the time I thought it was what I wanted, but obviously
not.
Most likely probably came across the word trans or non-binary on Tumblr, probably, of all places. Just sort of something clicking and being like, oh, there is an option. This has nothing to do with sexuality, because at the time I thought I was straight, and it turns out I'm a gay man.
Oh yeah, you're gay?
Yeah. Figuring out gender was sort of its own whole thing that I had never seen people around me deal with, not even in high school. Around the time that we met, I was sort of like, I have a binder, I know what those do. I'm figuring out how to present myself in a way that I feel more comfortable with. Eventually switched from she, her to they, them. I don't remember that being a big deal. I know a lot of my friends around the time time were also sort of figuring their gender out, but in very different ways and very separate from each other. I don't remember having a lot of talks with other people about it.
So I started questioning my gender identity in 2015. It was kind of always on the back burner because I was a very femme-presenting girl. I loved going out and showing off my boobs. I loved going to the club and just throwing ass. To go back to the gender norm thing, men can do that too.
Men can and should throw
And
their
should,
ass.
and should throw their ass. When I came into the realization that, I don't think I'm a girl, these thoughts were always prevalent, especially when I was younger. Younger and Catholic, by the way. I would go to bed and pray to God that I would wake up with a dick and be disappointed every morning between ages 7, 8, and 9 that I didn't have that. Well, okay, I'm not a boy, I don't have any boy parts, that's fine. And then when I got the language for gender and sex, opened my eyes into understanding, okay, so I couldn't just wish God for a penis, I was made this way, but I don't have to be that way. Did you generally find you had a lot of support from your peers?
Generally, there were a couple times where people also came from small towns and were older than me and very set in their ways, and then you explain it to them and they're very like, no. People, when they hear the word transgender, they're like, they have an image in their mind.
Yeah.
And a lot of people like, I've never heard the word non-binary, like what does that mean? It was confusing to some people, and while they were like, okay, I'll try, it wasn't the outstanding support that I maybe could have had, which is fine. Like I had that in other places in my life. What about you? How did you feel around that time, the thought of like coming out socially?
Despite having these very young thoughts of wanting to be biologically male, I never said anything or acted upon them. I was just gay all the way through. And my coming out from when I was gay was difficult. It was really easy at school when everyone was kind of on the same page, but when I would come home, that's where the challenge was. And now that I'm much older and my family is very accepting of me, they're very supportive of who I am, the conversation now has shifted from my sexuality to my gender. I just went public with a bunch of videos in a series with regards to binding and gender identity, and releasing that on my personal account was pretty terrifying, but I didn't care. I was like, this is me, you don't like it, you can unfollow. I didn't want the perception of me to change because I was subtly different. If I was gay is enough. I always felt like trans was pushing the line.
It's too big.
It was too much, it was too big, and I was so scared to lose people about it,
yes.
Especially having conversations with my family. But they were surprisingly very supportive. They try their best to use my pronouns. They try not to call me a girl. They try not to do things that, despite being around me for pretty much their whole lives, to rewire their thinking, I do give them the props.
The hard truth of it is, like, a lot of people, they won't accept you.
It's the pressure from society to fit into heteronormative, cisgendered boxes that when we either stray away from those or merge those together, it gets really confusing. It's confusing only for other people because the people who are doing it obviously understand what they're doing, but it's up to society to see how much of it they can handle or what they want to handle. That's really what it boils down to, because we have done all the research that we need for ourselves because it's within our capacity to want to and to do so.
It sucks that a lot of it boils down to people not understanding. Understanding isn't necessary for respect. I think it's very important to normalize a lot of this stuff and a lot of these discussions. The sexual health education in Catholic high school, like, I didn't learn anything. I didn't learn anything other than don't have sex or you'll die.
Yeah, get chlamydia and die.
Yeah, like, there was no talk about gender. There was no talk about what the word gender means versus biology and genitalia and how all of this stuff is so separate. My parents don't understand things about this, and they're very adamant in that biology does equal gender, and gender and biology are vastly different.
Yeah.
And that's like so important. I would love to see more publicly available information. It's definitely a lot more normalized in media now than it was when I was younger, which I think is incredible.
It's a very alienating experience.
You're not alone in what you're going through. There's always going to be somebody who's going through it somewhere with you. You may not see them, and yes, it is very difficult to go through these things alone.
But you're never alone.
You're never alone. I am very glad that I finally worked up to booking the doctor appointment and like having that conversation with my doctor and saying, okay, I'm doing this for me. So much work goes into maneuvering through a world that doesn't accept you or doesn't see you as the person that you are. It sort of came down to a point of, do I want to continue to do this, or do I want to make a big enough change in my life that's going to be difficult to go through the next year or so, but like in the end is ultimately good for me. I feel like I lean a little bit into like binary man.
Binary man?
Binary man.
Binary man. So this is a really interesting thing to bring up because there's so many stages in transitioning, and sometimes you'll only want to go up to a certain step. For example, I might not want top surgery, but other people will, and that's just where I stop. I stop at binding. I am completely okay with identifying as a non-binary person.
Picking and choosing what's right for you in terms of transitioning, that is so personal.
Very much your decision.
Absolutely. The media also perpetuates this thing. To be trans, you have to do this and do that and have this surgery. People always talk about like, oh, have you had this surgery? And it's like, well, that could mean anything. There are many different gender-affirming surgeries.
And is that the only way that you'll affirm my gender if I tell you that I got
Exactly,
surgery?
yeah, that was like a huge thing for me as someone who was a trans man, but up until very recently was not on hormones. You tell people like, yeah, I'm a man, and people are gonna look at you and be like, oh, but you don't sound like a man, you're not on testosterone, and it's like, I don't have access to it right now because
That doesn't
of the
make me less of a man.
Exactly.
Doesn't make me any less of a man.
Exactly.
Oh yes, that's so good. So good. Yes.
If you're watching this and you're struggling to sort of come to terms with these feelings, you don't have to come out, you don't have to tell anybody anything right now. Try things out for yourself, try different pronouns online, you know, like order a drink at Starbucks under a different name. If it feels right, great. If it doesn't,
At least you know.
at least you tried
I
it.
think a lot of my struggle was separating myself from femme presenting and female identity because I had been like that for so long, and it felt almost like imposter syndrome. I was going out and being femme presenting, but I would go home at the end of the night and be like, did I enjoy that? More often than not, I felt very displaced, very dissociated from that experience. And when I started becoming more mask presenting and coming into understanding my gender, it felt like I was seeing the world clearly. I've come to realize that I am totally fine despite what anyone has to say about it. But when I am put in spaces with cis men who have no idea what gender is, or they don't even have this kind of conversation, and to be misgendered, and to be one of the girls, and have to be put on that side of the room, it's sad. It's sad, it's difficult.
So many people are like, oh, you know, you got misgendered, what's the big deal? Somebody fucked up.
That fuck up could spiral me into a depression for 4 months.
Yeah.
You know, that could be a big deal.
Definitely building your support system prior to making any big decision is key in this whole thing. I just want there to be resources for people who don't understand.
Who aren't necessarily transitioning themselves,
Yes.
but they don't understand what it is, what
Yeah.
it means to transition.
Yes,
I see.
and like what can they do to support you? I feel like for me it's a pretty simple answer when it comes down to it. I just never felt like a girl, ever.
Yeah. Once I started learning about other pronouns, it felt uncomfortable for me to stick with she, her pronouns. And even when they're used now, I kind of like cringe.
Yeah.
I did try he, him pronouns
Oh,
at
yeah?
one point, yeah, and I didn't like it.
Fair.
Well, it wasn't for me. It
Yeah.
wasn't for me. I think a lot of people will argue that it's getting a little too confusing. What do you say about that?
I can understand that, especially if a cis person was to see where things are going and everyone's like, oh, you know, these trans people are so wild and they're doing all of these things. First of all, does it affect me personally? No. If somebody is choosing to go by he, him, but they dress completely different or whatever, none of that has anything to do with me. I will respect their choices. If I don't know something right off the bat, I would love to learn about it. I don't know all of the identities out there, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to try and learn about it and try and respect people when they tell me like, hey, this is my situation.
So where are you looking to go from here?
I'm definitely comfortable continuing with T, like that's the goal. Eventually top surgery. I'm not super uncomfortable with my chest, like whatever binding works for me for now. I'm excited to see where T takes me. So.
That's cool.
Yeah, how about you?
So right now I am completely fine with being non-binary. It doesn't put a lot of pressure on me to conform to either male or female, even though I am very male presenting. I like to have the option open there in my gender identity to continue to explore femininity, but not necessarily identify as a woman. I've thought about top surgery. Currently I'm not sure where I stand with it for myself, and there's nothing wrong with changing your mind.
No, absolutely not.
So for anyone out there who's questioning their own identity, their own gender, their own sexuality, don't be scared to go and seek the education. Don't be scared to be the most comfortable person that you can be for yourself.
Knowledge is power, as they
I
say.
think I'm doing
Yay. Yes. Yeah, perfect placement. There we go.
You happy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, sweet.
I feel like what we said earlier of it's a journey, so don't be in a rush. Nobody can decide for you what is right for you.
Everyone deserves to be their happiest self. Everyone deserves to look in the mirror and be happy with who they're seeing and know that that person is who they are.
I think everyone should be able to live their authentic self, and
Yeah.
that's it at the end of the day.
I'd like to thank Amiel for coming in today and donating a piece of his skin for the project. You can get to know more about Amiel and check out his work on Instagram at @thesandlord. All the links will be provided for down below. Amiel is a very good friend of mine, so please do check out his work and give him some support. Thank you for tuning into this episode regarding gender. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment down below, but if you have nothing nice to say, then don't say anything at all.
Head empty.
Head empty. Just vibes.
Just vibes.
It was completely. I'm happy for you.
Thank you.